This week's podcast is brought to you by Molecule Air Filters. Air pollution's a huge problem. Molecule destroys indoor pollutants and allergens at the molecular level. So if you have allergies, if you live in a city with bad air, if you're worried about your indoor air quality, which we all should be, I'd encourage you to check them out. Go to molecule.com, MOLEKULE.com, and get $75 off your first order by using coupon code LUCAS at checkout. I was looking through the show logs for the past 18 months, and one thing that stuck out to me, I had no idea, but one of our more popular episodes ever was about sex. And I don't think I've had many episodes, maybe 2 or 3 in the hundreds of shows we've done about sex and sexuality. So I thought, well, clearly this is an interest for my listeners. So I thought I would revisit it here this week, talking about sexuality and sex and sexual health at different stages of life. This is a totally G-rated show. So if you have kids around, don't worry at all. This is completely appropriate. Nothing salacious will happen here. I appreciate your support and listening. As always, if you have questions, please email me podcast@yogabody.com. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Lucas Rockwood Show. Today's show is called The Power of Pleasure, and I am joined here with Xanet Pailet. Xanet is a certified Tantra educator, a sexological body worker, a somatica-trained sex coach. She's worked in the therapeutic field for over 25 years. She's the author of a book, Living an Orgasmic Life. It's available on Amazon or else on her website, powerofpleasure.com. Xanet, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lucas. Super happy to be here.
We've had some people, well, I should say I've attempted to have some Tantra people on the show in the past. Tantra, unfortunately, I'm sure you know, kind of has this mixed reputation. You know, every time you say Tantra is these dodgy, weird yoga people with steamy rooms and boarded up doors. People kind of roll their eyes and they're like, "There's so much more to it." I was like, "Yeah, but there's a lot of weirdos out there too." And so tell me about this Tantra thing, because it's certainly, I've owned and operated yoga studios for a number of years, and I know that Tantra is a philosophy. I know that it's a sophisticated practice, and I also know there's a lot of creepy people using it as an excuse to, take advantage of people and throw weird orgies and things. So help us unpack that word, because as we drop that bomb, inevitably people are wondering, who is this person on this show?
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. Yeah, it does tend to be misrepresented. So Tantra is really a spiritual practice. It's a very ancient spiritual practice. It goes back centuries and centuries and centuries. And what we're talking about these days is more called neo or urban Tantra. So the sort of more evolved Tantra, if you will. But Tantra really means, it's a Sanskrit word, and it actually means to weave. And when we weave in Tantra, we are talking about practices that allow us to connect our body, our physical body, with our energetic body, because there's energy all around us, and our connection to our spirit or our spiritual body, regardless of what type of spirit that you believe in. And so when people practice Tantra, they're trying to bring a lot more mindfulness into their sexuality. And Tantra, by the way, is not just about sexuality. There are different types of Tantra. There's white Tantra, which is probably in the yoga community what that you're probably more familiar with. So it's more on the meditation yoga type of Tantra. Kundalini yoga is part of like the white Tantra, if you will. And then there is Tantra that is more related to sexuality and practices. But one of the things about Tantra that makes it so powerful is that it really allows us to drop in, not unlike yoga, right? To drop in, be very mindful, be very present in our bodies, and also be very present with our partners. As we really slow down our touch, we focus more on connecting through, sometimes through eye gazing, using our breath to be able to connect with and move energy throughout our body.
It's a great definition. I just think it's important that we help people understand the context about what we're talking about. And I thought we could do one more sort of backstory before we jump into things. I know that a lot of your work is inspired by your personal history, a couple of decades in a challenging marriage. I know a lot of people listening are in a similar situation. So maybe it makes sense to kind of set the stage here so people drop their guard a little and open their ears.
Yeah. I was, I'm a lawyer by training, even though I'm a sex and intimacy coach now. And I was married for 26 years, 25 years to another lawyer. And we were primarily in a sexless marriage. We had 2 children, so it wasn't 100% sexless, but we were primarily in a sexless marriage for about 15 years. We actually ended up sleeping in separate beds. And there's a lot of reasons for the fact that we were in a sexless marriage. A lot of them had to do with my own issues. So I had a lot of challenges around sexuality. I had a lot of shame around sexuality. I had some trauma as a child, and that really had an impact on my ability to be connected with my body, my ability to be comfortable sexually. I actually had pain during intercourse as well, which a fair number of women have as well. And I had it starting from a very young age. So all of those combined ended up, resulted in us being in a sexless marriage. And then, as often happens when you stop having sex, which is not that uncommon, especially when you have little kids, but if you don't get back to it, you start losing intimacy as well. And that happened to me. We stopped touching each other, we stopped cuddling, we stopped kissing each other, and the relationship just really fell apart. But we stayed together without ever talking about it because we had children. And I think neither one of us wanted to make a change while the kids were still, relatively young in school, high school.
So when you say 15 years, when you say not talking about it, do you mean literally you never talked about it?
Yeah, like literally
Wow.
we never talked about it. I mean, it's pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that uncommon,
Not
right?
uncommon at all,
Because
yeah.
if we tried to talk about it, there'd be a lot of drama. There'd be a lot of tears, and neither one of us had the skills or the capacity to be able to figure out what to do.
So in terms of relationships, we've had a number of relationship counselors, psychologists, therapists, all kinds of different people on this show. And it seems that the recurring theme in terms of conflict, the overriding themes in intimate relationships is sex and money. The money one, let's just leave that aside. I don't think I have much to share there, and I don't know if that's your focus either. But let's talk about the sex thing. Why is it such a big deal? How is it that 2 really smart, educated people like you and your husband can go 15 years without talking about something basic? How is it that so many of our listeners are in that same place? How is it that this just fundamental biological need, along with all of the emotional and sophisticated human intimacy that comes along with it, how is it that we get ourselves into these places where we're all bottled up?
Yes, it's such a great question. So my answer to this is that this is something that we are socialized around. For most of us, the reason that we end up being in a situation where we can't talk about sex, we can't talk about sexuality, is it has so much charge around it. It is both so primal and so important, and yet for many people, it is so hard for us to be able to embrace and to be able to talk about it. And the reason that I believe it's so hard to talk about it is because of something that I call a sexual blueprint. But it's basically, Lucas, the messages that we received around sexuality as a child. And there's lots of negative messages that both women and men receive around their sexuality that makes it feel like it's something that we can't talk about, that there's a lot of shame involved in it. And shame is a huge piece. Honestly, I think it goes back to puritanical times. I mean, it really does go back a long time ago, because if you look at some of the ancient cultures, a lot of ancient cultures, they were incredibly sex positive. They actually worshiped sexuality, right? But, the puritanical, when the Puritans came, this whole culture started, we really got closed up around our sexuality and not feeling comfortable about your body, not feeling comfortable about sexuality, not having it modeled positively by your parents, being told by your religion or by your cultural institutions that sex is something that's bad, that it's only when it's for marriage, that there's no discussion about it being for a woman's pleasure, which is a huge issue as well, all makes it very, very uncomfortable for everyone to talk about, but particularly women. And I work with mostly women and some men, and I have definitely noticed that typically men have an easier time being able to talk about their sexuality. And for a lot of women, they will tell me I'm the only person that they've ever told this to. That happens all the time because it's just not something that seems socially acceptable. And a lot of women who have challenges and men around sexuality feel like they're broken. And when you feel like you're broken, you feel like there's something wrong with you. That's what shame is, right? Feeling like there's something wrong with you. Not like I did something wrong, but there's something really wrong with me. And that's a very, very challenging place for people to be. And so it makes talking about sex really uncomfortable because you don't even know how to fix it. You think you're broken. You don't think there's a solution. And it's not like you feel like, oh, I can just go contact somebody and, talk about it. There's just still so much stigma around it.
In the yoga tradition, not one that I'm a part of, but in the yoga tradition, there's this concept of brahmacharya, which is this idea of abstinence. And I don't really get much from yoga philosophy. I never really have. Doesn't do much for me. And yet this thought kind of lingers. And when I've traveled to various temples and different places in Thailand and India, and even in my own country, I spent quite a bit of time in the Catholic Church. This idea of abstinence to me has always seemed totally bonkers. And I feel so unsafe around a man claiming to be abstinent. And I'm just curious, what are your thoughts? I mean, a lot of spiritual traditions, monastic traditions of all types have this concept of abstinence. I mean, Gandhi struggled with this. I read his biography. He'd try to be abstinent for a while and he'd fail and he'd feel guilt and shame. I just think there is no virtue in abstinence to me at all. I have no respect for it. I think it's a crazy idea. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely goes against what our nature is. And, if you think about it, like bodies are made for pleasure. Just think about a little baby. I always use this as an example, like a little infant, right? Like they're totally happy, like touching themselves and feeling pleasure. And really, they only have two on and off switches. They have their pleasure switch and they have their pain switch, and then they're sleeping. Like that's it, right? So we're actually made to enjoy ourselves, to touch our body, to feel pleasure. And I believe when we have like an abstinence, even an abstinence sex education programs, like we're suppressing that very core animalistic need that we have. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Sex shows up twice. It's on the very bottom of the pyramid, right? Along with shelter and food. Like you can't survive without it, right? Shelter, food, water, and what else it is. And sex is one of them. And then it shows up again like midway in terms of like sexual and more like intimacy and connection, relationship, community. So it's such a core need for us. And when it is, suppressed, I mean, it shows up in what, the absolute disaster that we've seen in the Catholic diocese, right? It's like they can't suppress their sexual needs. They can't suppress their sexual desires. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's so much abuse, because of the suppression that's happening. So that's my sense of it. In some of the Eastern traditions, there may be more of a sense of, abstinence in terms of spirituality and oneness. I think what Tantra says is that, well, we use our sexuality, we connect with our sexual energy in order to come to that place of spiritual bliss. So I think it's very problematic as well. I'm in complete agreement with you.
I've had this really blessed life in all senses of the word, but in terms of my sexuality, somehow I've managed to make it to middle age with no trauma, no weird stories to share, nothing to overcome, which is super rare. The stats I hear about women are, 1 in 4, 1 in 3 women have had some type of sexual assault. I would guess that's probably even on the low end.
Right.
For men, I think it's, the numbers are lower, but not that much lower. People generally have some sort of weird story, trauma, abuse, something that comes up when the lights are out. And so we have that coupled with body shame, coupled with the fact that people don't even like to see themselves naked. There's just a lot of things going on, health challenges, erectile dysfunction, there's so many things going on. And so, you're working with couples, oftentimes middle-aged couples. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, psychological stuff, biomedical stuff, chemical hormone stuff going on. Where do you even start to unpack that multifaceted problem?
There's one place that I always have to start with, which is what's going on within the context of the relationship, because 9 times out of 10, the reason that a couple stops having sex, when you unpack some of the other factors, is related to the fact that there's built up anger, there's built up resentment, there's maybe been a betrayal in the past, right, that they're holding on to. And when you're not, you're feeling disconnected from your partner, you're feeling like you're not being seen, that your partner is not being present, then there's, for most people, and especially for most women, there's absolutely no desire to connect with that partner sexually. That's like the last thing in the world that you want to do. So I always start with an examination of, what's the emotional context of the relationship, because usually when couples are stopped having sex or having sexual challenges, there is an emotional component that precedes it. And that's actually where I start. And then we start looking at, some of the other factors. But a lot of those factors, hormones definitely come into play, and, those can be addressed medically. And certainly people have medical conditions and are taking meds that are suppressing their desire. There's a lot of pieces to look at it. But I always start with the emotional context. It's almost always the place to start.
And if we're to talk about the sexuality of a 19-year-old couple versus a 59-year-old couple, they're very different. The 19-year-old couple is very much climax focused, and a 59-year-old couple, it's a different thing. And my own sexuality, of course, has changed and morphed over the years. And I'm still relatively young. And I'm just curious, how do you think about this? And more importantly, how do you help your clients think about this when they think about aging and remaining sexual and letting that be something different at different ages?
Sex definitely does change as we age. There's no question about it. But also, I think as we age, we get a little smarter, and we bring some of that. We don't always, but we can bring some of that wisdom into our partnership and into our sexual encounters. And I think, I work with young couples too, because they're not having the greatest sex either all the time. So, for me, it's always around helping everybody just to slow down. Like whether you're 19 or you're 59, we still have to slow down. We have to really take our time with each other and allow arousal to build quickly. That's one of the things, certainly as we age, we need more time for arousal to build for both men and women, but particularly for women, and be really aware that sex is usually defined as intercourse, and that there's a lot of different ways to, quote, have sex. That's one of the things that I really work with my clients on. It's like, look, there's a lot of different ways to have sex. It's not just about intercourse. You can have a really hot sexual connection with somebody without even touching them.
Air pollution is a huge and growing problem, not just in megacities like Shanghai and Beijing, but also in beautiful, clean air-looking cities like Barcelona, where I live. We still have a big problem with air pollution. A lot of people are turning to HEPA filters. HEPA filters are kind of the industry standard, but they're not the best. This new technology, these molecule filters, they destroy indoor air pollutants at the molecular level, so they completely remove them from the air you breathe. Molecule filters use something called photoelectrochemical oxidation, or PECO for short. It's nanotechnology that eliminates allergens, mold, bacteria, viruses, and airborne chemicals. It'll destroy pollutants that are 1,000 times smaller than your typical HEPA filter, so it's just a better way to filter air. One customer using molecule filters said that she was even able to breathe through her nose for the first time in 15 years. So obviously, these filters are really working for people. To get $75 off your first order and to learn more, visit molecule.com, MOLEKULE, molecule.com, and enter the coupon code LUCAS at checkout.
You can have a really hot sexual connection with somebody without even touching them. If you're, using words or texting, right? Like all of that's possible. It's really understanding and learning how to generate the energy behind it that makes for really great sexual encounters. So, there's lots of opportunities to try different things and to connect with your partner in different ways. And in some ways, when we take intercourse off the table, which I do when I'm working with couples that are having challenges around sex, we definitely take intercourse off the table for a period of time. It opens up the door to lots of different possibilities because we don't have to be so goal-oriented and so focused on the climax, which really takes everybody out of the experience of actually enjoying their partner and being with each other. So there's a lot of value to aging and having great sex. And I know a lot of couples, and often I will hear this as well, particularly from women. A lot of women in middle age are much more sexually open and willing to explore sexually and more comfortable with their sexuality than they were when they were younger, which seems like it shouldn't necessarily be like that, but it really is. It's not surprising at all for me to have women in their 40s and 50s call and say like, wow, I'm really ready to sexually explore. This is like the last frontier for me. I really want to experience more pleasure. I'm not exactly sure why that happens. Again, I think it's sort of wisdom, aging, and also you're starting to look at your life and saying, is this all there is? Maybe there's something else here that I need to experience. So that's my opinion. That's sort of my sense of what happens between the different aging groups. But there's a lot of opportunity at all ages to have a lot better sex than most people are having.
So we have people listening right now who, for better or for worse, they have just been confronted with the fact that they're in a sexless relationship, and maybe they haven't had anybody ask them the question. Just by listening to this show, they're suddenly going, oh no, that's me. And inevitably, it's going to be one of the two partners, not both, and probably the other partner isn't going to listen to the show. Probably the other partner is going to be shut down and closed. What does that person do when it's one party trying to break through?
I mean, that makes it a lot more challenging, right? But I think part of it is getting a lot more awareness about what's actually going on in your body, what's going on in the relationship. And the key is, communication can either make or break a relationship. And that's really the truth, right? I just wrote an article about this, I'm in the process of writing an article about it, that a lot of sexless marriages end up being sexless because they're not communicating. And the person who is really struggling needs to start having communication with their partner and telling them, like, this is a problem. We need to do something about this. It takes two to tango, and both partners need to be involved in it. That doesn't mean, like, when I work with couples, but I also work with them individually. So it doesn't mean that there's not individual work that also needs to happen, but it's a lot more challenging when only one person comes to the party. It just, there's only so much you can do. You can, if you're a woman and you're experiencing low libido, then yes, read my book. I have a ton of exercises, things to really understand about your desire and whether your desires are being met. So there's a lot of exploration that you can do yourself, and there's practical exercises that you can do yourself to try to explore your body and explore your own sexuality and your sexual energy, and that will help. But if there's if there's a lot of resistance coming from the other partner, it's only going to take you so far.
So I think we've done a good job of giving people kind of a strategic way of thinking about their sexuality, thinking about communication, just valuing the importance of their own sexuality. I always like to give people some takeaway, actionable things that they can actually do. So again, let's just imagine somebody's in a relationship that maybe they just had kids and things have dried up. Maybe they've been in a long-term relationship that's fizzling. Maybe they're coming out of a relationship and they're starting a new one. They just don't know how to start again. What are some of the go-to things that you do with people? Like, do you send people to the vibrator shop? Do you, do you say no sex in bed? I've heard that often. If things aren't working, bed is off limits, has to be in the kitchen, has to be in the living room. Do you have any of these kind of go-to things that people could, I know obviously the big picture stuff is much more important in sorting out the psychology and in some cases the biology. But for people who just, want to try something tonight, do you have any go-to things that you send people to?
So one thing, I think one thing that is really important is I'll tell people, do not bring distractions into the bedroom. So leave your devices outside and spend more time connecting with your partner, right? Another little game that I like people to play, depending on how connected they are, but I think this is really helpful, is each of you takes a pad of paper and you get to write down 3 or 4 things that you would like to do to your partner or have your partner do to you, right? Just to start to, again, have a little bit of communication around what you want and what your partner wants. And, sometimes just deciding okay, well, we're not going to have sex, but we're just going to take our clothes off. We're going to agree not to have sex, right? We'll just take our clothes off and see if we can just hold each other, just have some stillness with each other, have some connection with each other, look at each other and just look at each other. So many people have a hard time just looking in their partner's eyes. Now, if there's a lot of anger and resentment, right, that can be hard. But just little small things that you can do to start to reconnect with each other. Be kind to each other. Appreciations, I would say that's one of the number one things, right? Can you give your partner a couple of appreciations? Maybe even have a little appreciation jar where each day you write down something that you appreciated that your partner does, and every day you get to pick one, each get to pick one out and read it. These are the types of things that help relationships stay healthy and help to sort of tamp down some of the anger and resentment that's happening. I always like to say, you need to put a lot more appreciations in the bank before you start criticizing, right? It's the ratio is 7 to 1. 7 appreciations before you can criticize your partner.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I got really into studying and reading and researching about sexuality quite a long time ago, I guess 15 years ago. And one of the things that I realized when I started to think about this and just kind of explore it myself is that it's very rare that people have lights on sober sex, and that goes for teenagers, but also for adults. And there's a bunch of really, really obvious things that people have never done, like lights on sober sex. Even just sober sex is really uncommon. It's, alcohol and lights off is kind of the standard. I mean, without that, probably, we'd be at 6 billion instead of 7.5 billion people without alcohol and dim lights, and so I just I'm just always thinking about those kinds of things, and also just thinking about this idea is I don't know, opening up your idea to what's okay, and I think people have ideas about what's not okay and what they don't like, and they get those really confused. Not liking something doesn't mean it's not okay, right? Somebody has some very simple fantasy or interest or wants to explore, and the fact that you don't like it is totally fine, but it doesn't mean that it's not okay, that it's not healthy. And right. I think when we talk about guilt and shame and rejection, when that gets stacked on years after years, relationship after relationship, a lot of times that's something really simple, like somebody loves to have sex in the morning or somebody loves to have sex in the kitchen or whatever it is, and suddenly they're being guilted and shamed about something which is just totally fine. Their partner's just not into it. And I think differentiating between what's not okay. For example, let's not even go there, but we could all come up with a laundry list of what's not okay. And then what somebody's just not into, I think that gets really confused. And then somebody who has a very, very vanilla kink is suddenly feeling guilt and shame about, something as simple as, the kitchen counter or whatever it is.
Right. No, I think that's a really, really great point. And, that's an interesting thing about fantasies for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes we have fantasies that we just want to keep as a fantasy. We may not actually ever want to do it. And I certainly have certain ones like that. It's like, oh, I love it there, but I don't know that I actually really want to enact it. And that, we need to be more accepting, right? It may be that I cannot play a role in your fantasy, honey. I am so sorry that I can't do that. But I am so happy that that's something that you want to do, and I can celebrate that. And that's the difference, right? I can celebrate what you want to do, even though I may not be able to do that with you. I think in those situations, I would actually say, okay, you may not be able to do that, but is there some sort of part that you might be able to? Because, often when people have a fantasy, underneath that is like, that's really their core erotic theme. It's like, that's what that really turns them on. It's that emotion that really turns them on. So is there a way in which we can figure out what that is and then create some sort of fantasy or scene where you'd be able to get what you want as well? But, that's part of the negotiation in relationships, right? There's going to be disappointment. 20% of relationships is about disappointment. We have to learn to accept that. We have to learn how to process disappointment. But, we can't expect that we're going to get our way all the time. And that also doesn't mean that we should be shaming somebody for a desire that they have that you're not able to participate in. So it's a really great point.
Xanet, I just have one more question. I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't talk about which is pornography. I have 2 kids, one's 14, one's 7. Haven't really had the pornography talk with either of them, and is way overdue with my daughter. And I grew up in a different era. Obviously, when I was a kid, we had pornography, but we had, one VHS tape for like a school full of boys, and there was, one Hustler magazine getting thrown around. Just very different than the onslaught of pornography. And if you just look at the websites that people go to, it's basically Facebook, Google, and porn. Like it's nobody talks about it, but porn and gambling are basically what the internet's really about, and we pretend that people are going to Facebook. What are your thoughts? And when you're working with couples, addiction to pornography, it's a huge, huge problem. What are your thoughts in terms of what this is doing to sexuality? And is there even is there appropriate use? Is there a use for it?
Yeah, multi-billion-dollar industry. So definitely I do have some strong feelings around pornography. First of all, I think that sometimes it is definitely appropriate. There are, porn can be hot. Porn can be cool, but porn can be hot, right? There can be a particular scene or particular movie that, turns you on. And I think that's fine. I'm very permissive. It's like whatever works to get your libido going, I think that's great. That being said, and this is primarily in the male population. I've not seen it very much in the female population. There is a lot of addiction to porn and masturbation, and it is problematic for a variety of different reasons. I think one of the reasons it's problematic is because porn by its nature it's a very disconnected experience. You're not really in your body. You really focus on what's going on the screen. And so a lot of men aren't even aware of their arousal, which is one of the reasons that so many men have early ejaculation, especially in their 20s, right? I see this all the time. So that's one big piece of it. Obviously, there's the whole dopamine rush and the whole, addiction component of it as well. It's not real, right? This is not how people actually have sex. This is not what, penises and vaginas actually look like. And so, young people are coming up with this completely artificial way of looking at sexuality. I think it's most porn, not all. There's some porn that's not demeaning, but a lot of it is very, very demeaning to women. So we also see this big connection between that as well. It's a challenge and it's a problem, and it's so easily accessible. And I don't know that I know the answer. Like, I don't have a solution to it. I know plenty of married men who I see who are using porn on a daily basis as well to masturbate. And I don't necessarily think that's a problem. I think if you want to use porn once a day to masturbate because that's what you need to do and you're not getting sex, that's fine. But I also think it's just become a distraction for not connecting as well. It's like, oh, I can just go masturbate. Why do I even bother? I'll just go masturbate and take care of myself. And that's not the same as actually having, an intimate connection with a partner. So I do think it's very problematic. And I think in your kids' age ranges, teenage boys, young boys, like they're all in porn. And it's causing a lot of problems. I'm seeing it, right? I see very young adults, young men in their 20s who are having a hard time connecting with women, having a hard time dating, having a hard time with intimacy, having a hard time with sex, having a hard time with erections. It's a huge problem.
It's a great conversation, and I think we could. I hope sometime we can have a follow-up call. I know that I've done a couple of shows on sex and sexuality in the past, and I'm kind of a shy guy, so I don't really get into this topic much. But they were really some of our most popular.
Thank you.
Yeah, they were really some of our most popular and most listened to shows. And so I realized, I shouldn't let my own hang-ups sort of get in the way. People are interested in this, and people are struggling with this. And I think it's just something that people like us just need to have an open conversation and allow people to think about it in a really open way. And you've certainly done a great deal of work to make that happen. I just wanted to acknowledge you and thank you for what you've done. And I appreciate you being so transparent with your story. I'm excited to check out your book. And for people listening, how can they find your book? How can they connect with you online?
Okay, so my book is called Living an Orgasmic Life, Heal Yourself and Awaken Your Pleasure, and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and some bookstores. And you can connect with me online at powerofpleasure.com. I have some great freebies and would love to be able to answer questions that people have. Thanks, Lucas. This was awesome.
If you're interested in becoming a yoga trapeze certified teacher, we have a course coming up in Barcelona at the end of November, and we still have a few spots left. This course happens to coincide with the holiday season in Barcelona, which means you will get to not only experience our teacher training course, which is world-renowned. We have over 500 graduates now teaching in a couple dozen countries, but you'll also get to see the lights get flicked on for the holiday season in Barcelona, which is beautiful. It's a really great time to be in the city. If you want to come hang out with us, come train with us, check out yogatrapezetraining.com, yogatrapezetraining.com. We have a listener question. This is a recurring question, but it's a really good question, so I will address it. And the question is, hey, Lucas, what type of fish oil should I buy? What brand should I buy? I never recommend brands. Well, that's not true. I usually don't recommend brands because I never really know what's going on behind the scenes with these companies. I try my best to do due diligence, but I never really know. But what I will tell you is what to look out for. In terms of fish oil, I don't personally eat any animal products, so I don't use fish oil, but I think for most people, it's a really smart idea. I've been using algae oil for a while. Algae oil sounds like a perfect solution, but it's not perfect. The processing is more challenging. It's quite a bit more expensive. There's very few manufacturers in the world, and so I'm not, I take algae oil because I've been on this sort of plant-based experiment for a really, really long time, 16, 17 years. And so I carry on with this. But I think for most people, probably a small fish oil is a small fish, meaning little fish, not small oils, but small fish source of fish oil. It's probably a good way to go. That's what I give my kids as well. And where to get it? What type? Okay, so I'm going to give you some really, really specific things to look out for, and you're going to have to nerd out and look on their website. You might even have to send an email to customer service. Again, I'm not going to recommend brands here because I just don't feel comfortable. And the truth is, I live in a very different country than you probably, so you probably don't have any of the same brands that I have access to in my part of the world. But here's what you're looking for. The first thing is you want to get carbon dioxide extracted fish oil. There's different ways to get oils out of things. There's carbon dioxide, which is a relatively natural way. Natural's kind of in air quotes there. And then there's hexane and other solvents, which are basically chemical solvents they'll use to remove oils. This is the same challenge you get with a lot of food oils as well. A cheap olive oil, for example, might even be hexane extracted. It's possible. Not usually, but it is possible. So you want a CO2 extracted triglyceride form, which is just basically the forms that the lipids are in, triglyceride form. And ideally, you want it from small fish. And usually, right now, at this time, it tends to come from the west coast of South America. That tends to be where it's generally thought of as the most sustainable fish population. Sustainable is used very liberally here. I don't think there's anything about fishing or the fishing industry that is sustainable. That said, there's no great solution. So just because it's not sustainable doesn't mean there's another great alternative. I have no idea if algae oil is sustainable. Maybe it takes more energy to create algae oil. I really have no idea. But at the moment, this is the going thought is that the fish population, small fish, usually comes from things like sardines and things like this, off the west coast of South America tends to be where it comes from. So when you're looking for the oils, you'll go to a big box pharmacy. If you're in the US, you might go to like a CVS or a Walgreens or something like that, and you will see all different ranges of fish oils. A couple of challenges here. The first challenge is if you see a clear bottle, don't buy it. I'll say that again, a clear bottle, don't buy it. So if you can see through the bottle and you see the pills, just don't buy it. That light entering that bottle is no good. It's just a sign of a really poor, inferior quality product and a manufacturer that doesn't know what they're doing. The second thing is if it's very inexpensive, also don't buy it. Fish oils are expensive. They will often cost as much as 50 cents per day just for supplements. In terms of fish oils versus plant-based omega-3s, there is quite a big difference. So in the plant-based world, you'll get ALA, alpha linoleic acid, which your body can convert to EPA and DHA, but EPA and DHA are more readily available to your body. It's kind of in the same way that you can eat beta carotene in carrots, or you can eat vitamin A from animal products. Beta carotene, very, very difficult to overdose on because it's coming in a form that your body has to turn into vitamin A. Vitamin A, very easy actually to overdose on, especially if you're taking supplements or something like that. And the same is true with omega-3s. In this case, since we have a deficiency, almost all of us, in omega-3 fats, usually you want to take an EPA or DHA form, which is why, yes, I eat chia seeds and flax seeds, but I also take algae oil, and I'd recommend that you either take an algae oil or a fish oil because we want that DHA and that EPA form. It really seems to make a big difference. And all of this is coming secondhand because I don't work clinically with people, but the medical doctors and holistic health practitioners that I've talked to, everyone's pretty much in agreement on this, even people who come from a really, really strict plant-based background. If they're working on correcting a chronic inflammatory condition, hormonal balance and things like that, they'll often stick somebody on an EPA DHA supplement, usually in the form of a small fish oil. So just to reiterate, first of all, they should be expensive, unfortunately. You should keep them in the refrigerator and you should consume them quickly, meaning don't buy years supply at once. They should be in an opaque bottle. Usually it's a completely solid PET plastic bottle. And they should be triglyceride form, CO2 extracted. And I think that's all you need to know. If you want to go for the algae oils, you won't find many companies out there making them. The processing is really complicated. If you go hunting and searching around, you'll see that algae oils are often used in baby formula. And the reason they stick them in baby formula and in kids supplements is because the general belief is that algae-derived oils have less heavy metal toxin risk than fish-derived oils. When we're dealing with really small fish, there's not a huge concern over mercury. The law of biomagnification says that, the things like mercury and other petrochemical toxins will get biomagnified into bigger fish. So when you're eating small fish extracted fish oils, the risk is pretty low. If you're eating something like cod oil, different story, right? This is why a lot of people are moving away from cod oil and moving to smaller fish oils. So that was a total nerd out session, but hopefully that's helpful. And I'd encourage you to choose wisely. There's certain supplements, no big deal. You go get a vitamin C, really, really easy to make ascorbic acid. It's made in a gajillion different plants all over the world. It's completely identical to something you get from an orange, no big deal. Get whatever, get a powder, get a tablet, get a chewing gum, whatever you want. When you start getting into oils, you have to be ultra careful to make sure you get something that's high quality, or it can actually have the opposite effect. You want this anti-inflammatory oil, suddenly you're eating a rancid oil that's going to have the opposite effect. Hope that's helpful. We have a listener question this week from Jake. Jake says, I'm a big fan of your show. I've been getting really into yoga the last few years. I thought of getting a tattoo of Namaste written in Sanskrit, as we say it in yoga all the time, and I had been led to believe it meant something along the lines of, my soul honors and bows down to your soul and recognizes the light within you, which I think is a beautiful sentiment. However, having been to Nepal and India recently, it seems that Namaste doesn't mean what I thought. It is actually more of a greeting, and it's really just synonymous with hello or welcome. If you could shed some light on this, I would really appreciate it, as I don't want to get a hello tattooed on my body in another language. Kind regards, Jake. So yeah, Jake, it does mean hello. And when I was in India, some people say namaste, and it certainly is said as hello. Does it mean the light within me honors the light within you? Yeah, probably, kind of, maybe. Adios, where I am here in Spain, that technically means, and Dios. If you break it up, adios means go with God, go to God, with God, Godspeed, this kind of thing. And that's technically very beautiful and very spiritual. But when I'm walking out of a shop, instead of saying adios, typically you just say adios, which means God, and I'm not really being spiritual, and most people aren't either when they say it. So I think you're right. If you put namaste on your body, you're basically writing hello on your body. But there are much worse things. I've seen, Hello Kitty, and I've seen lots of spiders and tarantulas on people's shoulders, and I have 3 ugly tattoos on my body, which I'm attempting to scrape off. So I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Sanskrit script is kind of beautiful, but in terms of this yoga cliche language, the ohms and the namastes and this kind of stuff, it's all kind of spiritual kitsch that basically Western students have given a whole bunch of significance to, and it doesn't really have that kind of significance in the rest of the world. A lot of people have this idea, they sort of glorify the Sanskrit language and think that everything that's being said in Sanskrit is spiritual and godlike. It's not really true. It's just an old language, and like lots of old languages, there's swear words and there's good words and bad words. It's no more holy or spiritual than any other language. And this is not me preaching. This is me coming, like I said, as a guy with a bunch of ugly tattoos on my body. So my recommendation is I would avoid getting the word hello in Sanskrit written on your bum.
This week's iTunes review is by Sarah Jade Yoga from Australia. Sarah Jade Yoga says, "Thank you for such an awesome podcast. I've been traveling through Africa on my motorbike for the last 5 months, and I can tell you your podcast has gotten me through some boring rides. They are full of valuable information, and I'm addicted to listening to them. Thank you, and keep on recording." Sarah Jade Yoga, you have won the Yoga Trapeze. Email us at podcast@yogabody.com, and we'll get that out to you.
If you like the Yoga Talk Show, you'll definitely want to get on our mailing list. Go to yogabody.com/sign me up. This is my private email list where once a week at the very most, I'll send you a quick update. This is where I send some of my insider information, some of the stuff that's not really for public consumption, but specifically for Yoga Talk Show listeners, early announcements of new courses and new products, and just for signing up, we give away a free prize. Usually we have some kind of physical gift or MP3 download, some kind of pose chart. We change it up every month, but to join the top secret list, please go to yogabody.com/sign me up. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.